My journey to meeting Jesus did not happen in a single moment, nor did it occur in the midst of thunder and lightning. Instead, it unfolded slowly, like the gentle coming of dawn, where darkness gives way to light, little by little, until suddenly you realize the world around you is illuminated. As a child, I grew up in a home where faith was a word spoken now and then, but never truly explained. Sundays were for chores and family, not for church pews or hymns. God, to me, was a distant concept, more like a storybook character than someone I could know. I went through life with a quiet longing, a sense that something was missing, though I couldn't have put a name to it then. By the time I entered my teenage years, the world seemed impossibly large and confusing. There were so many voices, all competing for my attention, each promising happiness or fulfillment if I would only follow their path. I tried to find meaning in friendships, in achievements, in the fleeting approval of others, but nothing ever felt permanent. Disappointments and setbacks began to pile up, and the emptiness inside me grew. One day, at the invitation of a friend, I found myself at a youth group gathering. I was skeptical and uncomfortable, unsure of what to expect. But as I listened to people share their stories, I was struck by a sense of authenticity and hope that I hadn't encountered before. These were people who spoke of a relationship with Jesus, not as a distant figure, but as someone real and present in their lives. I couldn't understand it, but I couldn't dismiss it either. That night, something in me shifted. I began to ask questions, quietly at first, then more boldly. Who was this Jesus that they spoke of? Why did they speak of him with such love and certainty? I started to read the Gospels, and as I read the words of Jesus, I found myself drawn to his compassion, his wisdom, and his willingness to reach out to the broken and lost. It wasn't a single verse or a dramatic revelation that changed me. It was a gradual unfolding, like the slow opening of a flower. I began to pray, hesitantly at first. My prayers were simple, sometimes just a whispered question or a plea for help. But I felt in those quiet moments something I had never felt before, a sense of being heard, of being known. There were challenges along the way. Doubts crept in and old habits died hard. But in the midst of my struggles, I began to experience a growing peace. I realized that Jesus was not a distant judge, but a loving Savior who cared about my pain and my hopes. I remember one night, overwhelmed by the weight of my mistakes, I finally surrendered. I asked Jesus to forgive me, to lead me, to fill the emptiness I couldn't fill on my own. From that moment on, my life began to change. Not in an instant, but gradually, as I learned to trust him more. I discovered a new sense of purpose, a joy that didn't depend on circumstances, and a community of believers who supported me in my journey. Meeting Jesus was not a one-time event, but a daily relationship. He became my guide, my friend, and my hope. Looking back, I see how he was with me all along, gently drawing me to himself. My story is not about my own strength or wisdom, but about the grace of a Savior who met me where I was and who continues to walk with me every step of the way. Choosing to follow Jesus is a decision that shapes the course of a person's life in profound and lasting ways. For many, it is not a choice made lightly, but one that emerges from personal reflection, experience, and a desire for deeper meaning. What draws someone to Jesus? Why does this path, among so many others, become the one to walk? For me, the journey began with questions. Questions about purpose, about the reality of good and evil, about love, forgiveness, and the meaning of life itself. In a world full of uncertainty and shifting values, I found myself searching for something constant, something true. My search led me through books, conversations, and moments of quiet contemplation. Over time, I realized that the stories I encountered about Jesus, his compassion, his wisdom, his willingness to reach out to the outcast and the broken, resonated deeply with my own hopes and longings. Jesus isn't just a figure of history. He is someone who speaks to the present. His teachings about loving your neighbor, about serving rather than being served, about forgiveness instead of revenge, these were not just lofty ideals, but practical ways to live. I saw how his words challenged the status quo, offering hope to those who felt unseen or unworthy. The more I learned, the more I saw that following Jesus wasn't about blind faith, but about engaging with life's biggest questions in a way that brought both honesty and hope. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when suffering or disappointment made me wonder if anything truly mattered. But it was often in these struggles that the message of Jesus became most real. The idea that God Himself would step into human history, experience pain, rejection, and even death, and yet offer forgiveness and new life, that was something I could not ignore. It spoke to my deepest need for grace, for a love that does not give up even when I fall short. Relationships played a role as well. I met people whose lives had been transformed by their faith, people who showed kindness, patience, and integrity, not just in words, but in action. Their example inspired me to take a closer look, to see if there was something more to this faith than traditions or rituals. As I opened my heart, I discovered a peace and purpose I had not known before. The sense that my life was part of a bigger story, that I was loved not for what I could achieve, but simply because I'm a child of God. Following Jesus also means embracing a community, a family that spans cultures, generations, and backgrounds. It's a journey walked together, where doubts can be voiced, questions can be explored, and joys and sorrows can be shared. I have found encouragement and support, and opportunities to serve others in ways that reflect the love I've received. Ultimately, I chose to follow Jesus because He offers not just answers, but Himself. He calls us to a life of meaning, purpose, and hope. A life where forgiveness is possible, where love triumphs over hate, and where every person matters. This path is not always easy, and there are still questions I wrestle with. But in following Jesus, I have found a foundation that does not shift with the tides of culture or circumstance. His love is constant, His grace is sufficient, and His invitation is open to all. The choice to follow Jesus is personal, but it is also an invitation to anyone who is searching, questioning, or longing for something more. It is a journey worth taking, and a decision I have never regretted. There was a time in my life when I felt lost, burdened by questions I couldn't answer, and weighed down by struggles I tried to hide. Every day felt like a repetition of the last, with worries, doubts, and a sense of emptiness I couldn't shake. I searched in all the usual places for meaning, success, relationships, achievements, but none of it filled the quiet longing inside me for something more. Then, I stumbled across the story of Jesus. At first, it was just words on a page, stories I had heard in passing but never truly considered. But as I read, something shifted. There was a message of hope, forgiveness, and love that reached past all my defenses. The story of a man who welcomed the outcast, forgave the unforgivable, and sacrificed everything not for the righteous, but for the broken. I began to wonder if that kind of love could really be for someone like me. As I learned more about Jesus, I realized His teachings weren't just ancient wisdom, they were an invitation. He spoke about loving your neighbor, turning the other cheek, and caring for the least among us. But more than that, He spoke of a God who knows us completely and loves us anyway. That idea was both terrifying and comforting. Could I really be fully known and still fully loved? I reached a point where I decided to take a step of faith. I prayed, awkwardly at first, unsure if anyone was listening, but I poured out my heart as honestly as I could. I admitted my fears, my failures, and my longing for a new direction. What happened wasn't a sudden flash of light or a dramatic moment. Instead, there was a gradual, gentle sense of peace that began to settle over me. It was as if the burden I'd carried for so long was being lifted bit by bit. Over time, I began to notice changes in myself. The anger and frustration that once defined my days slowly gave way to patience and understanding. The anxiety that kept me awake at night was replaced by a quiet trust that things would work out, even if I didn't have all the answers. Relationships that were strained started to heal as I learned to forgive others and myself. I discovered a purpose in serving others, just as Jesus taught, and found meaning in helping those around me. It wasn't always easy. There were days when doubts crept back in, when old habits tried to reclaim their place. But in those moments, I remembered the words of Jesus. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I learned that faith isn't about having it all together. It's about trusting in something greater than myself, even when the path isn't clear. Through this journey, Jesus changed my life, not by removing all my problems, but by transforming the way I faced them. He gave me hope when I felt hopeless, strength when I was weak, and love when I felt unlovable. Today, I walk with a confidence I never knew before, grounded not in what I've accomplished, but in the assurance that I am known, loved, and never alone. Looking back, I see how far I've come. The emptiness I once felt has been filled with peace, purpose, and a joy that goes beyond circumstances. That's how Jesus changed my life. And that's why I believe he can do the same for anyone who seeks him, just as I did.